In a recent video, I brought up two articles, one from Forbes and one from Hollywood Reporter. The video was about how I believe DC and Warner Brothers' future is quite bleak. Now, there are a lot of people who agree with me, and naturally, there are going to be a lot of people who don't agree with me. And I can guarantee you right now, there are a lot of people who probably don't like me after seeing a video like that. And frankly, I do not care. I'm here to speak my mind. I'm here to be honest. And if there's one thing I've promised myself and all my viewers on this channel, I'm never going to lie to you. I'm never going to be a suck up or a kiss ass to these companies. If I notice that there is something wrong with these corporations, if I notice that there is something that these studios are not doing right, I am going to call them out. And Warner Brothers is nowhere near free from that type of judgment. If anything, they keep putting themselves in situations where I get to rip on them. Now, that Hollywood Reporter article about where have all the DC fans gone, David Ayer retweeted that on Twitter, or well, now X, and I want to read to you what he said if you haven't seen it already. Easy solve. Let filmmakers have their vision. Don't operate from fear. Be daring. Look at what worked. Don't chase the market. DC has always had the best characters in publishing. Dark, intense, and thoughtful is the brand. I think what he said there perfectly sums up what DC and Warner Brothers needs, but it is the exact thing that DC and more so Warner Brothers will not do. It hasn't been what they've been doing for the past 6 years now, and it seems as if they will continue not to do this. Now, before getting into his statement and talking about some of the things he said, we got to take it back a little bit and just really look at the situation we're in right now. We are not unified. Us DC fans, us fans of this comic book brand, we are not together. Hardly any of us are on the same side. We are so divided in the sense that you can support whatever side of DC that you want, but there's going to be another side of DC that will not want to support what you support or just straight up hate you. You're a Snyder fan? Well, there's other people who aren't. You're a James Gunn fan? Well, there's other people who aren't. There's still people who live back in the 70s and 80s storytelling of Batman and Superman from Richard Donner and Tim Burton who still want their superhero stories told like that today. Well, a lot of people don't want to associate with that side of the fandom. There's people who just want animation projects, and mainly the people who do watch animation are just the comic book fans, and even some of us don't watch the animated projects anymore because some of us don't like the direction they take. Some of us don't like the artwork anymore. Some of us just aren't interested the way we used to be. The DC fan base, the DC community, we are as divided as we possibly can be, and to get us all back together again is going to be the hardest thing to potentially do. The more I read that article subheading, where have all the DC fans gone, the more it makes me think to myself, you know, a lot of us are actually still here, but we're quiet now. We're silent. We are just fed up with what has been going on. We are drained. We are tired of all these generic, typical superhero films getting made when that isn't what should be getting made. We're tired of the constant reboots. We're tired of the he says, she says. We're tired of the rumors and the leaks. We're tired of the lies. We're tired of Warner Brothers running this beautiful brand into the ground. As David Ayer says, letting these filmmakers have their vision is very important. Could you imagine if something happened, and it doesn't have to be review bombings or anything, but just imagine for a second, after Batman Begins, or maybe even after The Dark Knight, something happened to shake Warner Brothers' confidence, and all of a sudden they told Nolan he can no longer have his trilogy. Imagine what we would have been missing out on today. This is the problem with Warner Brothers. They let some people with biased reviews or BS comic community people on Twitter who just spew nonsense 24/7 because a story didn't go their particular way. They let these people get into their head and shake up a DC universe, constantly throwing doubt into the future of DC movies. Instead of just staying course, being patient, retaining their confidence, look at the position they find themselves in. Warner Brothers is at the worst point they can possibly get, yet they still find ways to get even worse. So what does Warner Brothers do? They get afraid, they shut down some of these creatives' films, they go into their films and change it without any of their permission. They now make DC films that feel very Marvel-esque. They feel, like I always say, very generic. Looking at Marvel for a moment here, they are losing some of their steam. A lot of the interest is starting to wean out. Now, I've said, if Marvel is to make a big enough movie like their future Avengers Secret Wars, if that movie is on a grand scale, if it is as good as the Russo brothers' Infinity War and Endgame, they have already gained enough interest from an audience, they have retained enough people that it would bring the people who still watch Marvel, it would bring the people who once watched Marvel but now find this interesting because they still have that little bit of trust, and they would bring in people who are maybe somehow just now getting into Marvel to all watch this spectacle. DC does not have that. If you cannot rely on all corners of your fan base to come together to support your movies, how do you expect general audience members to do this? But as for Marvel, like I said, some interest is waning. If interest is waning from Marvel, how does DC think it's a good idea to make Marvel type movies with DC characters and gain interest from everybody? If Marvel's losing people because their films are getting way too formulaic and way too generic, how does DC expect to succeed when they're just trying to copy them? Not chasing the market, like David Ayer once again says, is actually key. Stop chasing the success of Marvel. Yeah, maybe what you make will never be on that humongously grand scale level of what Marvel did with Avengers, but we also have to take in here that what Marvel did with their connected universe is like a 1 in a million chance. There's no guarantee something like this happens again, and there's no guarantee this can happen with DC. I don't think people really understand how hard it is to do what Kevin Feige happened to do with Marvel. Contrary to popular belief, what actually ended up happening with the MCU, there was no guarantee it was ever going to turn out that way. It just happened. If anything, DC and Warner Brothers chasing Marvel and Disney has only hurt them. Back during Man of Steel and Batman vs Superman and what Suicide Squad sounded like it was supposed to be from David Ayer, these 3 DC films were being released at the height of Marvel Cinematic Universe. So what a lot of people were seeing in Marvel, they were expecting DC to have that same brand, to have that same look. And when DC was trying to do something very different, that's not because it was bad, it's because people were not ready for something like that. Marvel was having its time to shine. DC tried to come in at the same time and try something different, and at that time, different was not a good thing. There was too much interest in Marvel for DC to have come in and just say, hey, we're doing something similar, the tone's gonna be different, come in and watch us. Those films were certainly unfairly reviewed by certain people. They were also tampered with behind the scenes. And hey, look, if you don't like those movies, you don't like those movies. Who am I to tell you otherwise? That's your opinion. But interestingly enough, when you look at Man of Steel and Batman vs Superman today, you start to notice a lot more appreciation for these films. Yes, there are still people who don't like them, but more than when they released, there are a lot of people now who are like, oh wow, this was actually a really good movie. Zack Snyder was doing something here. This could have been really interesting. Zack Snyder's Justice League is one of the most loved DC movies, at least of this modern era. And referring back to David Ayer, be daring. They were doing something with DC characters that I don't think a lot of people would have ever expected anybody to do before. They were developing a story in a new way and a new route that other people wouldn't have expected. But no, instead Warner Brothers comes in here, freaks out, and says, no, we need a Marvel universe reskinned with DC. Of course, that is always destined to blow up in your face. And I know when people say dark superhero movies, as he once again says here, dark, intense, and thoughtful, there's an easy cop-out that people have with the word dark when you associate them with superhero movies. And they always talk about how dark isn't a good thing. Some characters aren't meant to be dark. Okay, well then maybe a different word could be used here. Consequential. Superhero movies that actually have growth and consequences. And I think it was really important that DC was doing that. They were going down this route where some of these characters have changed over time, or they begin differently. But within their individual arcs, they were all going to end up being the characters we love, the characters we read or watch in animation. Having these serious and consequential stories is what heavily differed DC from Marvel being daring, not chasing the market. Look at what has happened when they chase the market. Their movies don't do well. This can even go back to the 80s. Look at the Burton Batman films. Even I'm not a fan of what Burton was doing. I'm not a huge fan of Michael Keaton as Batman. But those movies clearly worked. What happened after? Batman Forever, Batman and Robin? That speaks for itself. The Dark Knight trilogy, which pretty much opened the door and opened up the eyes of people who said, whoa, superhero movies aren't just entertaining to comic book fans. This can draw an interest of general audiences. This can be interesting to everyone around all boards of fan bases around the world, DC or not. Then you have Brandon Routh's Superman Returns, a Superman movie that you can read in any comic book ever made on Earth. That's why it didn't do too hot. David Ayer's Suicide Squad, which was butchered by the studio, and even so was 30 minutes of Batman vs. Superman. They had Joss Whedon, a Marvel director, come into DC to try and finish off a Justice League movie that was already 80% completed. Well, we saw what happened there. And then you move into movies like Harley Quinn and the Emancipation BS, Birds of Prey, whatever it's called, 2 Shazam movies, Blue Beetle, The Flash, Black Adam. Oh, but then what happens? Matt Reeves' Batman and Todd Phillips' Joker, 2 movies where the studio did not interfere and let the creatives be creative, and the fact that they aren't even part of a connected universe, they're just standalone films, and those movies do good. Yet Warner Brothers still doesn't want to learn from that lesson, and they still want to go down this path, which has resulted in 7 financial flops within the DCEU. And then you go over to James Gunn, bring him in to be a co-CEO of DC. And look, guys, I enjoy the Guardians films. I think Guardians 1 is really good, except for the end of the movie. I think it's terrible. Guardians 2 is okay, and Guardians 3 is really good as well. I think he is a solid filmmaker, but then you bring him in to create a brand new DC universe. Another trend of which Warner Brothers seems to follow, bringing in a Marvel creator over into DC. I'm not saying Gunn's gonna make DC Marvel or a Marvelous DC. I'm just saying it feels very strange that once again, Warner Brothers seems to be pulling these Marvel people over into DC. Should it just not be different? Shouldn't it just feel unique in its own way. DC was so tarnished with movies like Batman Forever and Batman and Robin, even Catwoman with Halle Berry. But then Nolan moves in with the Dark Knight trilogy and shows everybody, oh, this is what DC can look like and be at its best. And now we've entered our own generation's version of Batman and Robin, Batman Forever, Catwoman, and all their big stinkers. Another situation of where campy and formulaic does not work. Another situation where we need to be reminded that what David Ayer is saying here is true. A lot of people like to think what I say in my videos, I hate James Gunn. Hey, look, I'm not too fond of him. I don't think he's making the right decisions. I think he's done a lot of poor things being a co-CEO of DC. And I don't necessarily think things are going to be any better under him, let alone if the DCU even ends up happening. But what I am willing to admit here is if he makes a good movie, if his world actually ends up panning out solidly, I'll eat my words any day. I don't care. I just want DC to be successful. I want DC to be what I think all of us want it to be. Interesting, unique, thoughtful, daring. Once again, David Ayer, he hit the nail on the head. So now, as per usual, let me know in the comments below some of your opinions on this particular topic, and give me other opinions that maybe I didn't raise during this video. But that is all I have for you on this one, everyone. So until next time, I will talk to you all very soon.